evening, everybody. My name is Madeleine, and I work on waste management, recycling, and sustainability initiatives for outdoor music festivals. So I'm a garbo, but we have an approach to our work which, instead of just coming along and cleaning up after people once they've been and gone, we try and proactively influence and alter their behaviour so that we have less to clean up after. At the end of the day, using arts, good communication, education, and an appropriate amount of hugs. I'm just going to tonight give you a really super fast couple of slides of what we do, introduce a couple of ideas about behavioural psychology and why people behave the way that they do, and then show a couple of scenarios of different types of festivals, what they might do and why people might behave differently at each one. So this is meant to click through. So can everyone hear me up the back?
Yeah.
Great. So, I mean, we obviously start with how we put our bins everywhere, how we design them, using colour, repetition, consistency, both within a festival and between festivals if we can. We get the same demographic a lot of the time. We like to do fun things like these sculptures which collect cans. We've done a lot of those. We did the Canaconda, the volcano, the Canosaurus. This one is the can clips, which behind that circle of cans there was a sun symbol. So as people filled it up with cans, it eclipsed the sun, which was for, a total solar eclipse event in 2012. So it was totally appropriate. In the middle we've got one of our illustrious roving performance troops who spread our messaging, our expectations to the audience out in the campsites, on the stages. We've got our famous disco bins on the left there. All of these kind of make recycling or whatever easier for people to do. It removes the barrier of it being kind of icky or demeaning and makes it even socially advantageous, which I'll discuss a little bit more in a minute. We get down to some nitty-gritty detail. These are little psychological tricks. On the left there is bin ninjas. So we put images of ninja eyes on our bins, which is inspired by some research that shows that people are less inclined to be dishonest in the presence of eyes. So the particular research was a voluntary monetary contribution to shared resources. So in that case, it was office milk supplies. Interestingly, the tone of the eyes of the mood really affected people's compliance with whether or not they participated. Likewise, the smiley face here is very intentional and critical. Smiley faces have been shown to help sustain exceptional citizen behaviour. So, this is true. In a scenario where people were shown their performance in relation to their peer group, if people were outperforming others, they would have a tendency to kind of come down to the average, which sounds a little bit crappy at first, but that's only in the absence of the super critical piece of positive reinforcement. So once people were rewarded for outperforming others, they maintained that behaviour. Alright, so those guys are a good segue into behavioural psychology and what contributes to the way we behave day to day. I like those two because they the experiments they're based upon show that people are kind of willing to get away with something, even if it's not really what they believe is the right thing to do. So a lot of us might think that we behave based on our beliefs and our values or some intrinsic type of character. But there's a ridiculous swathe of research across so many disciplines that kind of tells the same story. And what that is that we're more responsive to our immediate social environment and our immediate spatial and structural environment, not necessarily physical. So we've got our beliefs, values, also things like our morals or our habits. These are things that reflect a personal history of an individual. Barriers and enablers, we've already talked about enablers tonight a little bit. These are things in someone's environment that will allow or inhibit the behaviour so they can be a person's education, their access to money or their access to infrastructure, their proximity to infrastructure, but also things like a legal and legislative, political environment. Importantly, with these, they can be real or perceived. So there might actually be something stopping someone from doing it, or they might just think that they can't for whatever reason. The social norms, obviously what's socially acceptable is a very complex sort of thing. There's overt stuff like, we've got an intrinsic drive to try and belong to a group, so that motivation for belonging and acceptance. Also, as we saw with Ninja Eyes before, there's an accountability thing from our peer group, or in the lack of an accountable scenario, we can go to the opposite end of the spectrum, and the individuation of behaviour as well can be a part of that. The part that I find interesting about the power of our social norms is that it really depends on the quality of our relationship with the group or the individual that's asking us to do something. So, we're more likely to do something that a loved one asks us to do. Makes sense. All of this makes sense. I'll share another little snippet of research about social norms. There was an experiment run where the researchers put a group of students into a test situation. And it was obviously easy to cheat on the test if you wanted to. Then they planted an actor in the group who finished the test in such a time that it was obvious that they cheated. And they had two distinct outcomes. One where everybody kind of followed suit en masse and cheated as well, or where there was an absolutely minimal cheating response amongst the rest of the group. And the determinant there was whether the actor cheater was wearing a jersey that was from the same college as the rest of the students, or whether he was wearing a jersey from a competing college. So whether or not they identified with that person determined whether they replicated their behaviour or actually did the exact opposite out of some sense of competition. So I mentioned our Ninja Eyes kind of working here, same with the positive reinforcement and smiley faces. The sculptural parts of our work kind of cross these bottom two. They're enablers in that it makes it easy to do a thing. They also, as I said, remove that barrier of something being gross or demeaning when it comes to rubbish. But they also have interesting social outcomes. For the individual, they get an intrinsic motivation because it's fun, but also because they're helping create something that's beautiful at the end of the day. But there's that co-creative process. It's a shared thing, so there's the social inclusion driver as well. Similarly, our roving performers who are in the middle in their green outfits, they perform a basic enabling function. They're communicating for us. They're communicating our expectations to the audience. Rule number one of waste management and life, really, you can't expect anyone to do something unless you've actually asked them nicely to do it. So that's absolutely critical. When it comes to the social aspect of that roving performance troupe, it's a little more complex. Basically, these guys get dressed up in costume, they've got stories, characters, songs, they're on the stages, they're roving throughout the festival precinct. They come meet people in the campsite to share our messages. When they come to meet you in a campsite, they're in a big group, they're lots of fun, they're positive, they're exciting, so they form an instantaneous peer group, but they're also instantly building a positive relationship, so you're more inclined to do what they ask you to. There's the aspect of accountability. Again, when you come and visit someone in their campsite and talk to them face to face, they're more likely to do what you ask them to, rather than if they've read it on a sign or in a brochure. When we put them on stages, we give them the authority of being representative of this festival, the overarching festival. So when they come to meet you in the campsites, they've got that authoritative relationship with the people. But conversely, by being on the stages, by being around, people are aware that they're representative of the festival as an entity. So when we come and meet you in your camp, we're saying the festival believes that this is important, the festival values this particular message. But also, there's that added element that we, as a festival, have bothered to come to talk to you personally. There's a respect there. So again, we're working on that relationship building in presenting those social norms. I don't want to underplay at all the amount of time and care we put into design and placement and the functionality of all our physical infrastructure. That's absolutely critical. You've got to make it easy for people. Again, though, this kind of crosses up into our social norms. Out in the real world, there are very concrete barriers to behaviours, but a lot of physical, spatial elements in our world have an implied social norm attached to it as well. So, say if we're at a festival and we put 4 bins with recycling and composting, we're obviously telling people that around here we compost things. Whenever you're designing or building something or designing a process for people, you're communicating with them as well. You're communicating your expectations, and you're also communicating to people what you think of them a little bit. I'll get back to that in a minute. The last thing I'll say about all of that is that the biggest barrier that I've come across in my work, talking to lots of people in fields of rubbish, is that we don't believe in one another very much. You talk to one person and they'll say, yeah, but everybody else is lazy or dirty or they're a trash bag. But what happens when I speak to all the other people is that they tell me the same thing. But once we start to tweak this environment so that it's easy for people to act in accordance with their beliefs, people start displaying pro-community behaviour, and we remind people that they are part of a community of people that do care. Just gonna take it away. So obviously I'm a little bit passionate about this, but I am really inspired and motivated by seeing real instantaneous and change over time as well. People in front of my eyes changing the way that they act and interact with themselves and their environment. I'm really excited about the festival platform as a space for experimenting with these types of behavioural responses. You've got a captive audience at the festival. They're in a good mood. They have essentially come there to experience something novel and to behave in a new way. You've also got a blank canvas when it comes to your spatial dimension and your social dimension. The physical stuff, obviously you build a city every time. It's temporary, you can move things around as much as you like. But I think that the spatial element as well is a blank canvas. Even an established festival can give itself a makeover, through branding and marketing. Then through your communications, through your musical program, through the retailers that you allow on site, through your decor and your arts, you're creating character, establishing a context and establishing a relationship with the people that are there. And people do perceive festivals as entities that they have a personal relationship with. I've been around the world a bunch talking to a lot of people about a lot of festivals, and they generally make a big distinction between two different types, which probably won't surprise you. You would be sorry. So people use these words. They talk about a commercial festival or a community vibe festival or a community feel or family vibe festival. And again, talking to people, there's some other words and phrases are recurring. So I'll start with the nice ones. You can tell they really care about you. It's really sweet. People start talking about how they really feel valued by a festival as an entity. On the flip side, you get treated like cattle. I've heard that a lot. Or, you're just a wallet to them. Which is pretty harsh, but these probably aren't unfamiliar to a lot of you in the audience. I'm sure some of you have felt this way at an event before. I know I have. So I'm going to just kind of rapid fire a few different approaches to design and how they might affect people's experience on both sides of this fence. But you can kind of tell from the wording here that the real difference is in people's sense of being treated and respected as an individual. So for instance, over here they might have a musical program that literally moves people as one group from each hit person to the next stage, whereas over here you might have more diversity of programming. You've got choice of things to do, you've got interactive elements, and on this side you can see the latest triple M or triple J, one hit wonder, or you can go to the bar, or you can go shopping, like everybody else, and that's it. Over here, your visual aesthetic will be a lot of advertising, in your face on billboards, on the bars, on the stages, being handed to you in shitty promotion and stuff, and we all know what it's like to be sold to all the time. Whereas over here, your visual scenario will be a lot more focused on arts, decor, and really enriching that part of your sensory experience. Here you might be manhandled through a gate into a muddy field to camp where there's no rules. Over here you'll have roads. The roads will have names. The festival village will have a name. You're a citizen of a place. You've got an address, you've got a home, you've got neighbours, and they'll hold you accountable. You'll also have readers over here whose sole purpose is to welcome you and make you feel accepted. I didn't mean to be so dramatic. What else? In communication, these guys will make all sorts of promises. Especially in my line of work, there's a lot of greenwashing that they don't follow through on. Whereas over here, people are consistent with their messaging. They ask for feedback, they start a dialogue, and they follow through. So we've got trust. One thing I'm missing that I can't remember. Oh well, there's some other interesting behavioural quirks that happen when you've got a commercial exchange. People are more dishonest. People are demotivated to perform up to standard when there's a monetary transaction. When there's a lack, when there's a lack of respect for the individual and esteem there, you could out in the real world relate that to delinquency and vandalism, to mob behaviour as mentioned. Over on this other side, through all of those design elements, there's a consistent story of choice, of trust, and of respect. So that's obviously, I've been talking tonight about a very specific context where we have a lot of control over our physical environment, a lot of control over our social environment. But I hope that what I've shown is that behaviour isn't a fixed thing, and that it's more a response to how we've crafted shared space, and importantly, about how we relate to one another. So day to day, we all contribute constantly to how we shape that space and how we shape our relationships and how we shape our culture. So there's a story from my little world, so please remember that everybody is capable of change.